My name is Evelyn Moore, and I am 67 years old. I live above the flower stall I've been running for nearly a decade, a corner of Philadelphia that smells of wet earth, gasoline, and morning coffee. I didn't think much of it when I received the email from my daughter-in-law that morning, but the word stuck like a thorn in my chest. The subject line was simply, "Tonight." The body of the message was worse. Please arrive on time, dress appropriately, try not to draw attention. It wasn't the first time Marissa had tried to remind me of my place, but something about the phrasing made me linger in front of my old closet longer than usual. I stood there surrounded by the clothes of a woman who has lived modestly, clothes that still smelled faintly of mothballs and the lavender sachets my husband once tucked between hangers. Arthur had been gone for nearly 20 years, but the scent of him, metal, oil, and the faint spice of aftershave remained in my memory stronger than any fabric softener. I settled on a black dress I had worn to Lily's baptism a decade ago. The hem hung unevenly where I let it out myself, and the zipper stuck halfway up, forcing me to wiggle like a woman much younger, much more desperate to impress. I smoothed my hair back, pinned it with an old clip, and told myself I wasn't going there for them. I was going because Daniel, my son, had asked me not to cause trouble. He had inherited his father's dark eyes, but not his steadiness. I would go because he was still my boy, even if he stood on the side of a family that measured worth by stock prices and the width of a smile. The sky darkened as I left the apartment. By the time I reached South Broad, the rain had come in sheets, heavy enough to make every streetlight glow with halos. I gripped the wheel, the wipers slapping back and forth, while I rehearsed small, safe sentences in my head. Thank you for inviting me. Lovely evening. The flowers are beautiful. The hotel where the party was held was the kind of place with doormen in pressed uniforms and chandeliers visible even from the street. I'd been told to arrive early, but the storm slowed traffic to a crawl. As I crept past the expressway overpass, I saw a sedan stalled sideways on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking desperately. Drivers leaned on their horns as they swerved around. I could have kept driving. In fact, I almost did, but something in me pulled to the shoulder, the same way Arthur always did when he heard a cough in an engine or saw a neighbor struggling with a jack. I clicked on my hazards and opened the umbrella I kept in the passenger seat. The rain was cold and needled down the back of my dress. A young woman stepped out, her shoes splashing in the water, pooling at the curb. She wore a navy suit that clung to her frame, her hair twisted back in a severe ponytail. Her phone buzzed nonstop in her hand, her voice sharp with panic as she muttered into the rain. "Battery?" I asked, raising my voice over the downpour. She looked at me as though she hadn't expected anyone to stop. "I don't know. It just died." The hood popped with a reluctant creak, steam rising like breath from a tired horse. I leaned in, feeling the familiar grit of oil and rain on my fingers, the way Arthur had taught me in our first years of marriage when money was tight and every repair had to be done by hand. I steadied the clamp, brushed off the corrosion, and sheltered the distributor cap under my umbrella. When she tried again, the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared back to life. The relief on her face was almost comical, but her gratitude was sharp, sincere. "You just saved me," she said. "I'm late for something I can't afford to miss. What's your name?" "Evelyn," I told her. She pressed a card into my hand, rain blurring the ink before I could read it. I waved her on, thinking it was nothing more than another good deed Arthur would have approved of. I had no idea that by stopping under that overpass, I had changed the course of the night and my family's future forever. The rain followed me like a curse, pounding against the windshield as I merged back onto the highway. I wiped my fingers on a napkin I found in the glove compartment, smearing black streaks across faded crumbs of blueberry muffin. I was already late, though lateness had never been the real crime in Marissa's world. My real crime was existing without the polish her family demanded. Still, I couldn't stop replaying the scene beneath the overpass. The young woman's face, sharp lines softening with relief, her voice breaking when she said I'd saved her career. I wanted to laugh at the exaggeration, but something about her urgency stuck with me. Maybe it was the phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, not as a nuisance, but as if I'd been placed there for a reason. By the time I reached the hotel, the rain had slowed to a mist. The valet line shimmered with luxury cars, sleek black sedans, a cherry red convertible, SUVs with tinted windows. My aging Buick looked like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. A young valet in a crisp jacket gave me a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes and pointed me toward the side lot. "Overflow parking," he said. The words were gentle, but the gesture stung. I parked between a delivery van and a dented pickup, then walked through the rain-soaked alley to the service entrance. My heels clicked against the wet pavement, my dress clinging to my legs. Inside, the carpet swallowed my footsteps, plush and perfumed with money. I followed the signs toward the grand ballroom, trying not to feel the weight of every glance that told me I didn't belong. At the registration table, a hostess handed me a name card with a smile that slipped when she read it. "Family table," she murmured, but when I found my seat, it was tucked beside the service doors at the far end of the room. I sat quietly, folding the napkin in my lap, pretending not to notice the distance between me and the glittering head table where Richard Grant Sr. sat surrounded by his legacy. My granddaughter, Lily, spotted me first. She darted from her mother's side and wrapped her arms around my waist, whispering, "I'm glad you came." Her hair smelled of melon shampoo, her eyes full of apology she was too young to explain. I held her close until Marissa called her back with a look sharp enough to cut. The ballroom itself was a spectacle. Crystal chandeliers dripped light like champagne. A band tuned their instruments in the corner, their notes weaving into the hum of voices. Waiters circled with trays of champagne flutes, their white gloves catching the light. I tried to disappear into the background, sipping water, watching the room pulse with confidence I could never fake. Then the doors opened again, and the stranger from the rain walked in. I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the frantic woman with wet hair and trembling hands. In her place was someone taller, steadier, a navy suit pressed sharp against her frame. She moved with the kind of confidence that parts crowds. Her eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. She smiled. My heart skipped. I didn't understand why she was here, or what role she played in this glittering world. But when she started walking toward me, I felt the weight of every gaze following her. She stopped at my table, took my hand as if we were old friends, and said, "Evelyn, you saved me tonight." The room hushed, curiosity rippling across faces painted with wealth. Richard Sr. shifted in his chair. Marissa's smile faltered. Daniel stared at his plate, and I, sitting at the table meant for invisibility, realized the woman I'd helped in the rain was about to rewrite the script of the evening. The ballroom's air carried the weight of money and perfume, mingling with the faint clink of glassware. As Clara's hand lingered on mine, the ripple of whispers spread like rings across a pond. She spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice calm, deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, I was nearly stranded in the storm tonight. Evelyn Moore stopped to help me when no one else did. I wouldn't have made it here without her." The applause that followed was polite but uneasy. People clapped the way they clap at charity auctions, unsure whether generosity might cost them. Clara smiled. Let the sound settle, then moved toward the stage. My table mates glanced between me and their plates, as though proximity alone might stain them. I wanted to shrink. But Lily's small hand squeezed mine again. You're important, she whispered, with a child's certainty. I managed a smile, though the truth of the night told me otherwise. The table I'd been given sat directly beside the service doors. Every few minutes, they swung open and shut, revealing glimpses of harried servers, stacks of plates, trays of steaming dishes. The clang of cutlery behind the doors reminded me of a kitchen shift rather than a family celebration. At the head table, Richard Sr. raised his glass, his smile practiced, almost rehearsed. To family, he declared. His voice boomed with authority that had cowed boardrooms for decades. The guests responded with their own glasses, the chorus of crystal filling the air like a command obeyed. I raised my water. My throat ached with the words I didn't say. Marissa looked stunning, as she always did, her red dress clinging to her like certainty. She caught my eye for a moment, lips tightening into what could barely be called a smile. It said, "You see where you belong, don't you?" Daniel stood near her, his posture straight, but his eyes restless. He offered me a small nod across the room, a gesture that was equal parts apology and distance. My son, caught between two worlds, unwilling to defend me but unable to ignore me. The band began to play soft jazz, the kind designed to lubricate conversation rather than be listened to. Waiters delivered salads with greens, so delicate they seemed grown under glass. At my table, someone muttered, "She's lucky to be here at all." I didn't bother to ask who. I tried to focus on the rhythm of the evening, the speeches, the laughter, the pattern of forks and knives, but my chest felt heavy. I thought of Arthur, who would have sat here with me, not caring what anyone thought. He used to tell me, "Respect isn't borrowed, it's demanded." Yet here I was, pretending that invisibility was a kind of dignity. Then, without fanfare, Clara reappeared at the stage. This time she was not the grateful stranger from the rain. She introduced herself with a calm that cut through the hum of conversation. "My name is Clara Benton," she said. "I'm managing director at Northbridge Capital." The room shifted, suddenly alert. Northbridge was a name spoken with reverence in financial circles. Their decisions made or broke legacies. Clara held herself like someone used to commanding such spaces. "We've been in discussions with the Moore Tech about a major investment," she continued. "Before we proceed, our counsel has something important to share." A tall man with wire-rimmed glasses joined her, carrying a folio. He introduced himself simply as Alan, counsel for Northbridge. The lights caught the sheen of paper as he unfolded documents that seemed to hum with consequence. And just like that, the evening pivoted. What began as a birthday celebration was about to become a reckoning. Alan adjusted the microphone. His voice was calm, almost too calm, the way a surgeon explains a procedure before the first incision. Our diligence uncovered original formation documents for Moretech Industries, dated March 1979, executed by Arthur Moore and Richard Grant, he said. The agreement allocates 51% equity to Mr. Moore, 49% to Mr. Grant. The words rang in my ears like church bells. 51%? My husband, Arthur, had been the majority owner all along. Alan turned a page, his tone steady. There is also a protective provision. Any transfer or dilution beyond 25% required the consent of the spouse of the majority holder. If living, we found no such consent recorded. Not then. Not ever. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the band froze. Their instruments caught mid-note. Glasses hovered in midair. Every eye turned toward Richard Sr., whose face, for once, betrayed uncertainty. And finally, Alan added, his voice sharp now. We obtained correspondence between Mr. Grant and his counsel in the early 2000s, discussing the obstacle of Mrs. Moore's required consent and strategizing how to conceal her interest. Gasps broke through the crowd. A woman at a nearby table dropped her fork. It clattered like a gavel. I stood rooted, my breath shallow. For years I had been treated as a burden, a relic of a forgotten past. Now, before 200 witnesses, the truth was carved into paper. Daniel rose from his seat. His voice cracked but carried. Dad told me once that he signed his name with a flourish because he wanted us to stand taller. Is this true? His eyes bored into Richard Sr. Richard lifted his glass, buying time, but his hand trembled. Arthur was a fine man, but not a businessman. I did what I had to do to save the company. No, Clara interjected smoothly. You did what you had to do to keep control. The room buzzed with tension. Marissa's face drained of color. She stood but said nothing, her silence louder than words. Clara turned to me. Mrs. Moore, would you step forward, please? Lily's hand slipped into mine, grounding me. Together, we walked to the stage. My heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing in the hush. At the microphone, I swallowed hard. I'm not a lawyer, I said, my voice trembling, but I'm Arthur's wife. If there was a paper that needed my consent, no one ever asked. If there was a signature that would have changed everything, it isn't mine. The audience shifted, the truth settling like weight across their shoulders. I saw Daniel's eyes glisten. For the first time in years, my son looked at me not as someone to be managed, but as someone to be heard. Alan closed the folio with finality. Northbridge cannot proceed unless this is resolved. Ownership must be corrected. Integrity restored. The chandeliers above glittered mercilessly, as if they too demanded justice. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a rising certainty. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the fulcrum on which the night now balanced, and I intended to use it. The ballroom seemed to vibrate with unspoken words after Alan closed his folio. Guests leaned across tables, whispering, eyes darting between me and Richard Sr. For decades, he had stood as the patriarch, untouchable, the man whose name was stamped on every annual report. But tonight, the paper in Alan's hands cut deeper than any rumor ever could. Richard rose, gripping the edge of the table like it might anchor him. His voice rasped with the strain of a man used to being obeyed. Arthur was a dreamer, he said. He didn't understand the business world. I carried this company when he was gone. Without me, there would be nothing to fight over. The words hung heavy, but Daniel broke through them. My son's face was pale, his jaw set. No, you carried it by stealing from my father's memory, he said, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it in that room. He looked at me then, truly looked, as though he was seeing me for the first time. Mom deserves to speak. I stepped closer to the microphone, feeling Lily's hand still wrapped around my fingers. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my voice steadied as it left me. I don't want to burn this family down. I want to set it right. My husband built Mortec with his own hands. His 51% belongs with his family. That's the truth. Clara, unflinching at my side, nodded once. Northbridge will only invest if this truth is recognized. That means Richard Grant must step down, effective immediately. An independent audit must begin, and Mrs. Moore, as Arthur's heir, must be acknowledged as majority shareholder. Gasps echoed across the room. Richard's face flushed crimson, his fingers tightening around the glass in his hand. For the first time, he looked cornered. Marissa stood suddenly, her heels striking the marble like small explosions. "This is a birthday celebration, not a boardroom," she snapped. "You can't humiliate my father like this." Clara's gaze didn't waver. "Our fraud doesn't wait for a convenient stage." The room went deathly still. Even the servers had retreated, frozen in doorways with trays suspended like shields. The chandeliers above seemed to glare down, merciless in their brilliance. I drew in a breath and spoke the words I'd carried for years. "I want 3 things. First, a complete audit. Second, a fund in Arthur's name, built from this investment, to give young people a chance at trades and apprenticeships. And third, Sunday dinners at my home. Every week. If we are family, then we will act like one." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Daniel nodded, voice cracking as he said, "I'll be there." Richard's defiance faltered. His empire was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. By the time midnight struck, the ink was drying on agreements no one had expected to sign at a birthday party. Richard's resignation letter lay folded like a defeated flag. Northbridge had promised their $500 million investment, contingent on the restructuring. For the first time in 2 decades, Moretech's foundation rested on honesty. The guests left in a rush of whispers, already rewriting the story to tell at their own tables. Some came to me with handshakes, belated kindness. "Arthur deserved better," one said softly. Another muttered, "We should have spoken sooner." I smiled thinly, accepting their words, though I knew their silence had cost me years of dignity. Still, bitterness is a tax you pay twice. I refused it. The audit began the very next week. Hidden accounts were unearthed. Shadow transactions dragged into the light. From it all came restitution, and with it, the Arthur Moore Fund. Millions were set aside for scholarships, welding programs, apprenticeships, tools for kids like Arthur once was. Kids with hands skilled enough to shape metal, but wallets too empty to buy their futures. At home, Sunday dinners returned. The first one was clumsy, chairs scraping, conversations halting. Marissa carrying a salad she seemed almost afraid to place on the table. Daniel brought flowers, awkward in his apology, but Lily lit candles and hummed while setting the silverware, her small rituals stitching us together. We ate. We stumbled through talk, and we ended up laughing at something silly Lily said about the cat. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Clara stopped by one Saturday when the peonies at my stall were in bloom. She wore jeans, hair loose, her authority softened by ordinary life. She bought 2 bunches and refused the discount. "You kept your hand steady when it mattered," she told me. I understood then she hadn't been talking about fixing her car. Months passed. I sat in a boardroom, casting a vote for a program that would hire apprentices straight out of community college. Later, I stood in my kitchen, watching Lily twirl in socks to an old record. For the first time in years, I felt Arthur close, not as a ghost of what I'd lost, but as a presence in what we'd built. On Lily's 11th birthday, she asked to visit the overpass where I had stopped that rainy night. We left flowers there, traffic rushing by, the city breathing around us. I whispered to the air, "Respect isn't borrowed, it's demanded." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it with every bone in my body. Weeks later, Daniel confessed he had lived for years with the shame of knowing something wasn't right. I thought protecting the family meant keeping quiet, he told me. But you showed me it means speaking when it costs the most. His voice broke, and I pulled him into an embrace that felt like reclaiming time itself. Marissa, too, began to soften. One Sunday, she stayed behind after dinner to help with dishes. Standing in my kitchen, hands in suds, she admitted, I judged you because you reminded me of what I feared, being powerless. She looked up, her eyes raw. I was wrong. That was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was the seed of something that might grow. I still talk to Arthur when the hallway light flickers. I tell him the oven runs hot. I tell him our granddaughter is learning to dance, and I tell him his company, once stolen, now lives with the dignity he always deserved. If grief is a shadow, then dignity is a flame. And at 67, I have learned to keep that flame steady, no matter how fierce the storm outside. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.